everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Listen up, because it's time for another episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read Chapter 7 of White Line Fever by Lemmy. Chapter 7 is called Ace of Spades. Here we go. We only had a fortnight to record Overkill, our second album, and first for Bronze. Considering our checkered recording history, however, it was a world of time for us. And besides, being quick in the studio had always been natural for us. The whole experience was pure joy. We recorded at the Roundhouse Studios, which were next to the club of the same name in North London. Jimmy Miller was excellent, as were Trevor Howsey and Ashley Howe, the engineers. Overkill was supposed to be something of a comeback album for Jimmy Miller, which is exactly what it turned out to be for him. He had gotten very heavily into heroin, which likely began when he was working with the Stones, and he had lost it for a couple of years. Since Overkill charted right away, it eventually peaked at 24. He got a lot of work from it, but months later, when we were working with him on Bomber, it was sadly clear that he was back on smack. Come to think of it, he must have been doing it during Overkill too, because he had already started showing up late now and again to the studio and coming up with completely preposterous excuses. One incident will give you a good example of his modus operandi. This particular day, he arrived 5 hours late for a session, and we were all sitting in the studio twiddling our thumbs at $1,000 an hour, muttering, "That he cometh not." Finally, he showed up, and before he was even through the door, he launched into his tale. That way, of course, we didn't have room to start in with, "You! Where have you been?" and all that. Guys, you wouldn't believe what happened," he said. "I called this taxi and it didn't come, so I had to call another one, and then that arrived in the snow, you know what I mean? And then he ran out of gas, so we had to push it to a filling station. And then the thing on the solenoid was gone, so I had to call another cab from the filling station, and he didn't arrive for ages. And anyway, he broke down on the way after that too, and I've been walking through the snow for 3 hours. Look at my clothes." We knew he'd been rolling in the snow outside for 3 minutes to get his drawers wet. I looked out the window and saw him doing it, as a matter of fact, but at least he was jovial, and he got the job done. And he took the trouble to be original. God rest his soul. As is usual with Motorhead, there were quite a few new songs that we had already been performing live. Damage Case, No Class, I Won't Pay Your Price, and Tear You Down were among those. Others we wrote in the studio. Capricorn, which happens to be my astrological sign, was written in one night. Eddie's solo for that one, I recall, happened while he was tuning up. The tape was running while he was fooling around with his guitar, and Jimmy added some echo. When Eddie finished tuning, he came in and said, "I'll do it now," and Jimmy told him, "Oh, we got it. That saved us some money." Metropolis was another fast one. I went to see Metropolis, the movie, at the Electric Cinema in Portobello Road one night, and then I came home and wrote the song in 5 minutes. The words don't make any sense, though. They're complete gibberish. Metropolis, the worlds collide, ain't nobody could be on your side, I don't care, Metropolis is something new, ain't nobody got their eyes on you, I don't care. See what I mean? Some of my lyrics have more meat on them. I always wanted Tina Turner to record I'll Be Your Sister, for instance. I like writing songs for women. In fact, I've written songs with women. I've been called sexist by some factions of radical, frigid feminists that kind of want to change the word manhole to personhole. That kind of... But they don't know what they're talking about. When I find good women rockers, I'll lend them a hand. I'll never get any kind of credit for helping to advance women in rock and roll, but I have. Girlschool is an example. They were never that well known in the States, but in England they were quite popular for a while. In March of 1979, when we began our Overkill tour, our first big outing really, they were our opening act. A lot of their early success came from their association with us, and they wound up being quite an asset for us too. It was one of the guys in our office, Dave Giggles Gillian, who found Girlschool originally. The band was from Tooting, South London. I listened to a single called Take It All Away that they'd put out on some little label and thought they were excellent. Plus, I liked the idea of girls being in a band. I wanted to stick it up these guitarist asses because Girlschool's guitarist Kelly Johnson was as good as any guitarist I've ever seen in my life. The nights when she was really on, she was as good as Jeff Beck. So I went down to see them at a rehearsal they were having. I thought they were great, and I went back and told the others, they're coming on tour. The boys were a bit weird about it at first, but after the first night they played with us, they shut up. Not only were Girlschool an excellent band, they were really feisty, and they didn't give a. One night, a couple of days after the tour started, they walked out and some guy in the audience shouted, "Go on, get 'em off!" And Kelly walked up to the mic and said, "You get 'em off!" We could all do with a good laugh. I thought that was really good. I like chicks who stick up for themselves. Then they kicked into their set and proceeded to knock the crowd on their ass. During the first week of the tour, we were in Edinburgh, and a few of us were sitting in the lobby of the Crest Hotel. It was me and Eddie and Kelly and Girlschool singer Kim McAuliffe with her boyfriend Tim. He later wound up being the boyfriend of their drummer Denise Dufert. See? There's not much difference between male and female rockers. I don't recall where Phil or the rest of Girlschool's were. And I fed Kelly Johnson the worst line I ever fed a woman in my life. How'd you like to go up to my room and watch the old gray whistle test? Me, that's lame, isn't it? Would you like to go to my room and watch TV? And she said, yeah, which only goes to show. So off we went. And I heard later, Kim leaned across to Eddie and said, let's go to your room and watch the old gray whistle test. Eddie was a bit embarrassed, but she got up and led him to the elevator with Tim still sitting there in the lobby. And Tim walked out of the hotel, got in the van, and drove home to London, stranding all the chicks at the hotel. So we had to take them on our bus with us for the tour, which suited me fine. They were great people and really funny. A couple of them were real handfuls. Kelly could behave almost like Keith Moon. She used to get drunk so she couldn't even see and then try to take baths and fall over in the tub like that. Eventually, Kelly left the band because she fell in love with Vicky Blue of the Runaways and she moved to the States. Vicky got her a green card, so maybe they got married. When I was having the overnight relationship with Kelly, she hadn't yet realized she was gay or bisexual, but I knew when I was with her that something was wrong, like she was trying too hard and it wasn't working. But then, sometime after she and Vicky broke up, she got married to some guy, so I think it was maybe she just didn't fancy me. But whatever. She's an excellent guitarist and a really nice person, and whatever she doesn't matter. She's an old friend of mine. All at Girlschool are. I'd go to bat for them anytime. As always, I digress, and frankly, this is where my mind starts to wander anyway, because much of the next several years are a blur. That's what happens when you start to be successful and you're in a rock band. You're either on the road for months or in the studio, or people are leading you around somewhere, to a TV show or a radio station or whatever, and most of the time you're not even sure about where you are. It all starts to blend together and everything looks the same. Some incidents stand out though, and Finland's Punkiahori Festival, which we played in June 1979, is certainly one of them. And not because it was a great gig either. In fact, it was horrendous. It took place at the side of a lake in a forest of pine and birch, like Peer Gynt, you know, and the crowd was really dour. We played badly, the sound sucked, and it was too bloody anticlimactic for words. When we came off stage, we thought, oh, what a awful gig. And I said, well, let's run out through the equipment. So I went round back behind my stacks and ran out through them, and they all fell over, but doom! And Eddie was trying to knock his amps down. God, he was terrible at that. Ed could never knock a stack over. Then Phil, Clumso the Wonder Dog, walked through his drums, but I think he did as much damage to himself as he did to the gear. Our roadie Graham got so excited that he pushed the PA over on the crowd. And there's more. We were given this terrible caravan as a dressing room. There was no cooling in it, and Finland in the summer is hot, with loads of little mosquitoes flying around. Not the frozen place it becomes in the dead of winter. And there was no booze in there either. Horrors. So we were sweltering in this thing, and Chris Needs, writer for Zigzag magazine, was walking about with this tree for some reason. It was a small tree, but nevertheless, he put it through one of the caravan's windows while he was trying to talk to us. I guess he forgot he was carrying it, so we felt, well, we up the caravan now, so we'd better disguise the fact by sailing it into the lake and setting it on fire. Give it a Viking funeral. and it went out very well. Floated off in a very Arthurian manner, flames and smoke pouring out of it, and it sunk in quite a dramatic display. That wasn't the end of it. Back at the hotel, Phil and Eddie took all the furniture and everything out of the room and put it up in the garden outside. It was a complete replica of the room's layout, only out of doors. Like I said, Finland summers are warm. Then we had a food fight on the bus on the way to the airport. Well, we had to do that because the driver told us in a very firm Finnish accent, "Anything has happened to my bus, make 30, then is coming trouble." So immediately all the packed lunches came out and started flying. The bus looked totally destroyed, with fruit and egg all over it, but it wasn't actually damaged. Then when we got to the airport customs area, the trouble really started. "I think you've done something very terrible," the customs guy told me. "Not me, governor. Come this way, please." So they stuck me in this room and took my passport away. And one by one, everyone else came in too. We all got thrown in jail, the band and the crews, except for Rich, our roadie, who also did the front of the house sound. He'd signed in at the hotel as Rich, which wasn't what his name was on the passport, so he wound up going straight through, getting on the plane and flying home, wondering why there were all these empty seats around him. And the rest of us were stuck in this Finnish jail for 3 or 4 days. All we had between us to read that whole time was one copy of the Melody Maker, and I read that thing literally from cover to cover. I read the date, page numbers, the adverts, every word, and the food was too. Finally, we got deported. They put us on a plane to Copenhagen, then we had to change over to a flight to London. The first flight went okay, except that Eddie immediately poured his vodka and orange down the neck of a woman in front of him. We were celebrating because we were free. Then we got on the second plane, and before we took off, the captain came storming down the aisle. "I've heard about you and you're being deported from Finland," he glowered. "If you try anything on this plane, I will have you arrested in London." So we didn't do anything on the whole way back to London, but when we landed, there were all these cops on the tarmac. "Oh," we thought, and then they arrested the captain. It turned out he was flying the plane drunk, which only goes to show. A couple weeks after our Finnish excursion, we went back in the studio and began working on our next record, Bomber, with Jimmy Miller. By then, he was completely out of it, and this got to be a little much. He would say he was going to the toilet for a moment, then he'd be in there for an hour, and when he came out, he'd be nodding. Once he went to the men's room and he never came back at all, so we went in and he was gone. Apparently, he left to find his dealer, and we found him in his car, asleep at the wheel. Even when he was around, he was absent. When we had the rough mixdown, we transferred it to a 1/4-inch tape and we started playing it back. Jimmy was nodding out in his chair the whole time we were setting it up. And when the music came on, he woke with a start, looked at us, and started moving the faders up and down like he was working. And the tape wasn't even going through the desk. That was a bit of a giveaway. Poor bugger, he died a couple of years back. It's a shame. He was truly a good guy. Ironically, or perhaps not so ironically, Bomber has one of my first anti-heroin songs on it, Dead Men Tell No Tales, which when we play it live is often called Dead Men Smell Toenails. It was about someone else though, not Jimmy. Bomber is also the one album where Eddie sings a track, Step Down. He'd been that I was getting all the limelight, but he wouldn't do anything about it. I got sick of him complaining, so I said, "Right, you're gonna sing one on this album." "Oh no, man," he protested. "I can't sing, man. I don't got no voice." "You're a perfectly good singer, man. Get on the microphone." So he did it with much grumbling, and it was like pulling teeth to get him to do it live. He hated it, but really he was a good singer. Eddie, I don't see why he didn't do more of it. Later on, when Wurzel was in the band, he wouldn't sing either, and he was good too. And he used to sing in all his other bands. Whatever. I came to the conclusion long ago that there's something wrong with you if you're a guitar player. They whine about how artistic they are, and they never get any recognition, and they think they're the main force of the band, which, when it comes to my band, is really dangerous. Overall, Bomber was a good record, but there are a couple of really naff tracks on it, like Talking Head, Bomber, Stone Dead Forever, all the Aces. Those were great. Wallman was a weird pace for us. That was quite nice. Bomber was basically the transition record between Overkill and our next album, Ace of Spades. And that was its function, really. and it peaked at number 11 on the charts, so it got us up another notch success-wise. In the middle of making Bomber, we played the Reading Festival. We were on the same night as the Police and the Mix. That was the great thing about the Reading Festival in those days. There were a lot of different bands on the bill. Rock and roll hadn't yet become the categorized mess it is today. We were selling Motorhead flags that year, and they were flying in abundance during the show, much to the consternation of some of the more pretentious critics in the audience. After Reading, we finished up mixing Bomber, and Bronze threw us a record release party at London's Bandwagon Heavy Metal Soundhouse. That was awful. I've always hated those things. You're supposed to be all things to all people all night, which is impossible and unpleasant besides. Phony bull is what it is. We were far more excited about getting on the road. We had a few dates in Germany, our first, and then it was back up and down to England again. Plus we had a new toy on stage, our infamous Bomber lighting rig. The rig was a replica of a German World War II bomber made out of heavy aluminum tubing, 40 foot by 40 foot. It flew 4 ways, backwards and forwards and side to side. The first lighting rig that ever did that, by the way. It was heavy as... and if it had ever fallen, it would have smashed us flat. But it was an impressive prop, and we used it for several tours. We never got the chance to take it to the States, though, because it was too massive for the venues we played there. So America, unfortunately, has never received the full Motorhead attack. By this time, the band was generating quite a bit of money for somebody, not for us. After Bomber charted at 11, it was clear that we would continue to get even bigger, but none of us in the band ever really saw a return. All we made immediately went into more elaborate stage productions. We were alright though. Around the time Overkill came out, we were put on wages and we finally found decent places to live. Before that, we were always living on somebody else's couches. Eddie was sharing with 5 other people, so his flat was halfway decent. Phil had been sharing a place with a couple guys in Battersea, but for ages I was crashing at people's flats and walking around London with this little World War II tank map case that contained a tape recorder, 5 tapes, and a pair of socks. It didn't have a map in it though. I needed one too, wandering around London. I quite like drifting about like that, really. You go and live with chicks for a week and disappear. That was quite fine. But that all changed when our records began selling. Our living conditions showed much improvement, even if they weren't exactly castles. Of course, having home isn't all that important when you're spending most of your time on the road. We did something like 53 gigs with 2 days off before having a break. On our dates through England, we had Saxon supporting us. They were nice guys, but kind of weird because they didn't drink or smoke. They had a tea urn in their room. We found that a bit odd. Interestingly, their drummer Pete Gill wound up joining Motorhead a few years later. He'd started drinking heavily by the time he joined us, however. He drank even heavier after he joined. The tour with Saxon was also where I discovered acupuncture. Biff, Saxon's singer, and I both lost our voices. Apparently, living healthily didn't get him any further than my lifestyle got me. Phil knew this amateur acupuncturist, and she put pins all over me and hooked them up to a 12-volt tractor battery. My voice was back in 20 minutes. Biff didn't try it out, so he suffered. In the midst of our travels, Bronze put out an EP of 4 tracks. Leaving Here, Stone Dead Forever, Dead Men Tell No Tales, and Too Late, Too Late, recorded live while we were gigging. As a joke, I told the label to call it the Golden Years. Turned out they were our golden years. I think I sorta knew, really. The songs were pretty badly recorded, but the record got in the charts. In July, we played Stafford Bingley Hall, and we were presented with silver discs for Bomber. It had sold over 250,000 records. And they had this Queen Elizabeth impersonator give them to us. The 3 of us got down on bended knee to receive them like we were being knighted. Actually, that woman impersonates the Queen to this day, but she looks a bit rough now. The real Queen isn't looking all that great these days either, for that matter. In fact, I was feeling a bit rough at this particular show. I collapsed backstage after we finished and had to be revived for the encore. I don't recall why. I'd probably been up for 3 days, so I blacked out, but Phil and Eddie, those 2 miserable, thought I was gold bricking. I was sitting there with damp towels on my head, and those 2 were standing there going, "Man, you stayed up for 3 days. How dare you, you mother..." They were worried about the slant on their careers it would cause, and like that. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. Whenever Eddie got really drunk and obnoxious, he would always go on at me for drinking in the press. He'd say, "Lemmy drinks too much," and he was always drunk when he was doing the interviews, but nobody ever mentioned that. After that gig, I told the papers that I'd collapsed because I had 3 blowjobs that afternoon. The part about getting the blowjobs was true, actually. There were chicks all over the place, and there was this really cute little Indian bird. She was 2 of them. There was this room in the hall that was full of cushions and shawls hanging down. It was like some Maltese dream. So I locked myself in there with her and wouldn't come out. Well, wouldn't you do the same? See? Wonder where she is now. Not long after Stafford Bingley Hall, we went into rehearsals to prepare for our next record, Ace of Spades. It was one of our longer albums in terms of the recording process. It went easier than our previous albums because we were on a roll and we couldn't be stopped then. Well, we can't be stopped now, but we couldn't be stopped nationally then because the band's popularity had been building. Bomber did better than Overkill, and Ace of Spades promised to do even more. We were on our way up, and we knew this was going to be a hit. We felt good. I didn't realize then how doomed we were. The end of something, really, instead of the beginning. Ace of Spades was the ultimate record for that particular lineup of Motorhead. I only started thinking about that when we were recording Iron Fist, out of the frying pan into the bear trap. We were at Jackson Studios in Rickmansworth for about 6 weeks from the beginning of August 1980 until mid-September. Our producer was Vic Mayle. I knew him from the Hawkwind days when Vic was with Pi Records. He used to own a mobile studio. Hawkwind hired it out to do Space Ritual, and he came along with it. Vic was a great man and a great producer, really brilliant. He had diabetes, of which he later died. It's just an ongoing thing. The nice guys always go. That's why I'm still around. The songs on Ace of Spades are considered classics by Motorhead fans, and I must say, they are an excellent bunch. We really enjoyed doing them. Those were good times. We were winning, and we were younger, and we believed it. The older you get, the less you can believe. It's not your fault, you know. It just comes to you that everything isn't cornflakes and Skittles and beer. It's a jungle out there. But I never cared about it when I was young. I wasn't starving, you see, and I was having a good time. It certainly beats high-paid plumbing. Like always, there are a lot of funny little segments and songs. We had a tap dancing part in Ace of Spades, you know. Ding, dang, dangity. We always imagined ourselves tap dancing at that point. I use gambling metaphors, mostly cards and dice, when it comes to that sort of thing. I'm more into the slot machines, actually, but she can't really sing about spinning fruit and the wheels coming down. Most of the songs just poker, really. I know you've got to see me read 'em and weep. Dead Man's Hand again, Aces and Eights. That was Wild Bill Hickok's hand when he got shot. To be honest, although Ace of Spades is a good song, I'm sick to death of it now. 2 decades on, whenever people think of Motorhead, they think Ace of Spades. We didn't become fossilized after that record, you know. We've had quite a few good releases since then, but the fans want to hear it, so we still play it every night. For myself, I've had enough of that song. My chief memory of We Are the Road Crew is Eddie lying on his back in the studio, helpless with laughter, his guitar feeding back all over the place. Halfway through what was supposed to be his solo, and we left it on because it was so funny. That song was my first 10-minute lyric. That's how long it took me to get the words down in the studio. I remember going off somewhere because Vic had to go eat something. It had to do with his diabetes. He hadn't finished buttering his first cracker when I was back in there telling him, "I've done it." "Off," he said. "I haven't even eaten yet." When he realized I really had finished the lyrics, he was astonished. I was quite surprised myself. 10 minutes of real work ain't bad. I've dashed through a few more songs that way since then. One of our road crew cried when we first played that song for them. I'm not going to say who it was. We took a lot of them up to the studio one day and played them the track, and this one guy cracked and broke down right then and there. He was weeping. "Oh, that's a good one. That's great." It was really nice that it affected somebody that deeply. Bands as a rule don't treat their crews too well. I try to. I've caught hell from feminists for several songs I've written, but for some reason they never said anything about jailbait. They never mentioned anything about that, and it was blatant. But basically, my lyrics on Ace of Spades came from what I know personally, like, the chase is better. Then the catch. Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, whenever you move in with somebody, it's gone, you know. They leave their knickers in the bathroom and they have horrible habits that you didn't know about, which you become aware of almost immediately. It's fatal, you know. To have a relationship is fatal to the relationship. We did the photo session for the album cover on a crisp, cold autumn day. Everybody thinks we did it in the desert, but it was in South Mimms, north of London. The western motif was Eddie's idea. He had an aching desire to be Clint Eastwood. Keep in mind that at this point, I was the only one who had been to America. We all looked pretty good dressed up as gunslingers, though. We had a slight problem with the wardrobe. The spade-shaped studs on my pants were too far apart. I took them off one leg and put them all on the other, so it turned out that I could only be photographed from one side. But other than that, it went quite well. After we finished the album, it was back to all those TV shows and interviews which seemed to blend together in a haze. But there were some highlights. One was in November when we went on an ITV show called Tis Was. It was a kids' Saturday morning show that featured a rock band every week. Chris Tarrant, who hosted the show, was a real strange person. But he knew what kids want to see. Kids want to see grown-ups themselves over, you know. They love that. There were buckets of water everywhere on that program. It wasn't warm water either. It was cold, and they were swinging it all over. And there was this phantom flying flinger. He'd come up to somebody during the show and go poof with this huge fruit pie. It was great fun, completely slapstick. We were on that show a couple times. Once we were on with Girlschool and we were having a game of musical pies. The pie stopped in my hand and I had to smash it in the face of Denise, Girlschool's drummer. The poor girl was cowering a bit, but it was like, sorry, I've got to let you have it, babe. Everybody who went on got it bad. At one point on this November show, Eddie Clark was decimated by about 6 buckets of water. It was funny as... And they had this cage there and they'd put people in it. Viewers wrote in for weeks ahead of time, volunteering to get in. There was a waiting list to be stuck in this cage, where everything in the world was dumped on them. They had this big trough full of green gunge, vicious, garbagey slop, and they tipped that all over him at the end of the show. Phil had volunteered to be in the cage, but our manager Doug Smith went in, and they wouldn't let him out again. Ha ha! So we had some revenge on that son of a... Great show. Ace Up Your Sleeve tour that fall was mammoth. We barreled through all of Great Britain with the bomber rig, the Overkill backdrop with its flashing eyes, and on a couple of the earlier shows we all had all these lighting tubes forming a gigantic Ace of Spades playing card. The latter didn't last very long. It was a bit on the fragile side, and I believe it met an untimely demise. It was around the time of this tour that our old label Chiswick released the Beer Drinkers EP, the leftovers from the Motorhead England album sessions. The record charted, peaking at 43, and although we didn't see any big monetary returns, it was good for us. Anything's good that gets the name around, you know. We finished up the Ace Up Your Sleeve tour with 4 nights at the Hammersmith Odon, and then an after show. Christmas party was thrown for us at the Clarendon Hotel. There were some fire-eating strippers there, all good, wholesome English fun. I don't know where they came from. It was some publicity-type scheme. If it had been somebody else's party, I probably would have enjoyed it. But as I said earlier, I hate those things if I have to be involved. It's terrible because you just come off stage and you're knackered. The last thing you want to do is go to some room upstairs at a boozer and be sociable. I mean, who needs it? After a gig, I preferred to get laid immediately if possible, as you may have gathered. I like to get one-on-one with a chick and just go someplace with her. I don't really mind where. A club or the back of the bus or whatever, you know. One time I vanished with this chick out the side door of Hammersmith Odon right after our gig. Her name was Debbie, and she used to be a page 3 girl in the Sun. Saw quite a bit of her for a while. Debbie, sadly, is no longer with us. Rest in peace. I walked off stage and gave the guitar to the roadie. Debbie was standing there, so I grabbed her and we immediately nipped out the door, joining the crowd that was walking away from my own gig. There I was in the middle of all these people walking down the road. A couple of them looked. "That's Lemmy!" "No, it's not. It can't be. Forget it. It can't be him." They couldn't believe I was out that quick, so nobody asked me for an autograph. Nothing. It was really funny. I'd fooled them, stonewalled them. In late December, we popped on over to Ireland to do a few more dates. That's where Filthy broke his neck. It was in Belfast after a gig, and he was on a staircase playing Who Can Lift Each Other Up the Highest with a large Irishman. The Irishman lifted Phil up the highest and at the same time took a step back to admire his work into thin air. They went backwards down the staircase with Phil flying, and he landed on the back of his neck. We went over there to them. The other guy got up, but Phil didn't. I said to him, "Come on, man." With stark terror in his eyes, he looked up at me. "I can't move. We took him to hospital in Falls Road. Keep in mind that this was Belfast on a Saturday night, and Falls Road is a Catholic area. You know, there were bullets going by. We went into this hospital past the gunshot wounds and the bomb blast wounds, and they took him in. They had him braced on a table with his head propped up so he couldn't move it. Well, he couldn't move it anyway. "I'm dying for a piss," he moaned as he was lying there. When he said that, our tour manager Mickey grabbed me and pulled me out the door. "What's the matter?" I wanted to know. As we were just through the threshold, we heard a nurse saying, "I'll just put this catheter in here, Mr. Tyler." Then as the doors closed, "Ugh, you!" "I just wanted to get out of there before the screaming started," said Mickey. I suppose Phil had assumed that they were going to somehow walk him into the toilet, let him have a piss there, and bring him back. He was lucky. He could have been paralyzed forever. Finally, Filthy emerged, wearing this huge brace on his neck. I cut a bow tie out of the black gaffer tape and stuck it on the front so he looked like a Spanish waiter with a goiter. Phil's done lots of other stuff besides that. We were going to do a book called Hospitals I Have Known Across Europe by Phil Taylor, a guide to European emergency rooms, you know. He's not real graceful. You see, on the bus during one tour, he was almost completely prone at all times because he couldn't get his bus legs together. The guy couldn't walk down the aisle. He would affect this very strange stiff-legged gait, which he thought would help him stand up, but in fact laid him flat nearby, always. He spent that whole tour on one knee on the bus, mobile proposing across Europe. With Filthy out of action, we had to postpone the European tour we had planned at the beginning of '81. Meanwhile, Girlschool were at Rixman Worth, making a record with Vic. It was Vic's idea to have Motorhead and Girlschool record a single together. The song we did was Please Don't Touch, which was originally recorded by one of my favorite groups of days past, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. The band had some attention around 1977 after John died as the Pirates. This cover wound up being part of a record called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre EP, which was released on February 14th. The flip side had us doing the Girlschool tune Emergency, Eddie's second vocal, and also the girls covering Bomber. Denise Dufort played drums on all those tracks since Phil couldn't. That single turned out to be the biggest hit either Motorhead or Girlschool ever had in the British singles chart. It went to number 5, and we went on top of Pop's, billed as Head Girl. Although Denise played the drums on the show, Filthy made an appearance, dancing around and adding a backup vocal or two. About a week before that Top of the Pops appearance, both Motorhead and Girlschool were filmed in concert for a Nottingham TV show called Rock Stage. It was held at the Theatre Royal. I still got a video of that performance. At the end of Motorhead, I leapt onto the Bomber lighting rig, pointing my bass at the audience like a machine gun as one does, and got stuck halfway up. The guy who was in charge of lifting the rig left me up there for what felt like years, but it was only a couple minutes. I had this curly lead and it was stretched out tight. It was pulling me out of the plane, and I was thinking, if I ever get down alive, I'll kill you. You can't tell that from watching the show, however. The effect looked great. The guy responsible for that snafu miraculously and wisely disappeared after the show. In late February, Sounds magazine ran its 1980s Readers' Poll results, and we came out on top in everything. I think we even nabbed Top Girl Singer. Oh, except for one category. I came second for Male Sex Object, below David Coverdale. I didn't mind, he had more hair. By March, Filthy had healed enough so that we could resume touring. We went all through Europe and with Girlschool, and then came back and did 4 dates in England. We recorded all the English gigs for our live record, No Sleep Till Hammersmith. Originally, we were going to make it a double album, but we didn't have quite enough material. It would have been 3 sides, which would have been a bit of a con. Incidentally, none of the recorded shows were at Hammersmith. They were at West Runton, Leeds, and 2 dates in Newcastle. The last 3 dates turned out the best, and we chose the songs from those shows. It was also Leeds and Newcastle where we were presented with silver and gold albums for Ace of Spades, a silver disc for Overkill, and a silver for Please Don't Touch. This time they gave them to us backstage, however. We didn't stick around for the release of No Sleep Till Hammersmith. By mid-April, we were off to the States for our first tour there. We were opening up for Ozzy Osbourne on his Blizzard of Oz tour. While we were doing that, the record came out and immediately charted at number 1. I heard about it in New York. I was still in bed when somebody phoned me. "You went straight in at number 1, I was told." Call me back, will you? I mumbled and hung up. Then about 10 minutes later it hit me, and I was up like a shot. That was the height of our popularity in England. Of course, when you peaked, there's nowhere to go but down. But at the time, we didn't know we had peaked. We didn't know anything. Well, that's the end of Chapter 7. Let me know what you thought of Chapter 7 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.